The snow crunched beneath my skis as I carved fresh tracks down the pristine slope of Blackhawk Mountain. My property. My mountain. The exhilaration of the early morning run, with the sun just beginning to peek over the distant peaks, made every penny of my investment worth it. I'd purchased this land 3 years ago, all 120 acres of it, including the majestic mountain that overlooked the Valley Creek Estates subdivision. Little did I know that this morning's peaceful ski run would trigger a battle that would change everything. I was halfway down my favorite route when I spotted the flashing lights. 2 police cruisers had pulled up to the base of the mountain where my private access road met the main trail. Standing beside one of the vehicles was a woman with her arms crossed, pointing up in my direction. Even from this distance, I recognized the rigid posture and perfectly coiffed blonde bob of Patricia Wilkerson, the president of the Valley Creek Estates Homeowners Association, Mr. Keating. An officer called out as I skidded to a halt at the bottom of the run. "We need to speak with you." I popped off my skis, planting them in the snow. "Officer, what seems to be the problem?" Patricia stepped forward before the officer could respond. "The problem, Noah, is that you're violating HOA regulations by operating an unauthorized ski slope. This is a nuisance and a liability to our community." I couldn't help but laugh. "Patricia, I'm not operating anything. I'm skiing on my own property. This mountain is part of the HOA's recreational land. It always has been," she insisted, her voice rising with each word. "We have documentation proving it." The officer, whose name badge read Garcia, looked uncomfortable. "Sir, Miss Wilkerson has filed a complaint stating you're trespassing on HOA property and creating a safety hazard." I removed my goggles and faced them both. "Officer Garcia, I have the deed to this entire mountain. I purchased it from Randall Development 3 years ago. This isn't HOA property." Patricia's face reddened. "That's impossible. The HOA has had a recreational lease on this mountain for 15 years. Had, I corrected. The lease expired 2 years ago. Randall chose to sell rather than renew. I have all the documentation inside." "Would you like to see it?" Officer Garcia nodded. "That would be helpful." As we trudged through the snow toward my cabin, I could feel Patricia's glare burning into my back. I'd built the cabin shortly after purchasing the land, a modern timber and glass structure that blended with the natural landscape, while offering breathtaking views of the valley below. Valley Creek Estates, with its cookie-cutter homes and manicured lawns, looked like a model train set from up here. Inside, I retrieved the property deed, survey maps, and sale documentation from my office. Officer Garcia examined them carefully while Patricia paced the living room, occasionally stopping to scrutinize my dacre with obvious disdain. "Everything appears to be in order," Officer Garcia finally said, handing the papers back to me. "Mr. Keating does indeed own this property, including the mountain." "That's absurd," Patricia snapped. "The HOA has been maintaining that mountain for years. We've invested thousands in clearing trails, and when you had a lease," I interrupted. "A lease that expired. Randall Development informed the HOA of the expiration and their intent to sell. I have copies of those notices too." Patricia's face went from red to nearly purple. "This isn't over, Noah. The board will be hearing about this." She stormed out, slamming my front door hard enough to rattle the windows. Officer Garcia gave me an apologetic look. "Sorry to disturb your morning, Mr. Keating." "Not your fault, officer. You were just doing your job." After they left, I poured myself a cup of coffee and stared out at my mountain. I'd moved to Colorado specifically for this property after selling my tech startup. The mountain was my sanctuary, my escape from the corporate world I'd left behind. I'd planned to keep it private, maybe share it with friends during ski season, but I had no intention of opening it to the public or dealing with the headache of commercial operation. What I hadn't counted on was the wrath of Patricia Wilkerson and the Valley Creek Estates HOA. As I would soon discover, they weren't going to accept reality without a fight. The following afternoon, I returned home from a supply run in town to find a certified letter stuck in my door. It was from the Valley Creek Estates HOA, demanding I cease and desist all unauthorized recreational activities on community property, and threatening legal action if I failed to comply within 48 hours. I called my lawyer, Marcus Santos, immediately. "They're grasping at straws," Marcus said after I read him the letter. "The property boundaries and ownership are clear, but HOAs can be persistent, especially when they've convinced themselves they're right." "What should I do?" I asked. "Document everything. Keep copies of all communications. And whatever you do, don't stop using your property as you normally would." That could be interpreted as acknowledging their claim. I followed his advice, continuing my daily ski runs and ignoring the occasional HOA vehicle that would park at the base of my access road, taking photos and making notes. A week passed without further incident, and I began to hope that Patricia and her board had finally accepted reality. Then came Saturday morning. I was making breakfast when I heard engines outside. Looking through my kitchen window, I saw 3 Valley Creek Estates maintenance trucks driving up my private road, followed by what appeared to be a small snowcat groomer. I hurried outside, coffee still in hand. "Excuse me," I called out as workers began unloading equipment. "This is private property. What do you think you're doing?" A tall man in a Valley Creek Estates jacket approached. "HOA maintenance, sir. We're here to groom the community ski trails and post safety signage." "There are no community ski trails here," I said firmly. "This is my private property." He looked confused, glancing down at a work order. "I just follow the schedule, sir. Miss Wilkerson authorized this maintenance run." "Of course she did," I muttered. "Well, I'm the legal owner of this property, and I'm not authorizing anything. Please pack up and leave immediately." The workers looked at each other uncertainly until Patricia's silver Mercedes SUV came roaring up the road. She emerged wearing an expensive-looking ski outfit, complete with a fur-trimmed hat. "Noah," she said with a tight smile, "I see you're obstructing community maintenance again. Patricia, you can't just send people onto my property. The police already confirmed I own this land." She waved a dismissive hand. "The board has reviewed the situation and determined that there was a clerical error in the property records. Our attorney is handling it. In the meantime, we're resuming normal maintenance of our recreational area." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my temper in check. "There was no clerical error. I purchased this land legally. Your lease expired and Randall Development sold the property to me. End of story." "We'll let the courts decide that," she replied smugly. "In the meantime, the HOA bylaws clearly state that community recreational facilities must be properly maintained. Your bylaws don't apply here because this isn't part of your community," I insisted. "Oh, but it is," she said, reaching into her designer handbag and pulling out a folder. "According to the original community plans filed with the county in 2005, this entire mountain was designated as common area for Valley Creek Estates." I glanced at the documents she thrust toward me, yellowed pages showing community plans from nearly 20 years ago. "Those were preliminary plans, Patricia. The final development changed. Randall kept ownership of the mountain and leased it to the HOA. "That's your interpretation," she said coldly. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we have work to do." I pulled out my phone. "I'm calling the police to report trespassers." Go ahead, she challenged. We'll show them our documentation. Who do you think they'll believe? A longtime community organization or some outsider who's trying to steal community property? Despite her confidence, the police once again sided with me when they arrived. The officers reviewed both sets of documents and concluded that my current deed superseded any historical development plans. They escorted the HOA maintenance crew off my property, with Patricia following behind, promising retribution. Later that afternoon, Marcus called with disturbing news. The HOA has filed a lawsuit against you, he said gravely. They're claiming fraudulent land acquisition and seeking an injunction to prevent you from using the property until the case is resolved. I sank into my chair. Can they actually win? It's unlikely, Marcus assured me, but these cases can drag on and they know it. They're probably hoping to wear you down until you agree to some kind of compromise, maybe selling them an easement or access rights. Not happening, I said firmly. This mountain is mine. Then we fight, Marcus replied. I'll file our response tomorrow. The lawsuit was just the beginning. Over the next 2 weeks, the HOA escalated their campaign against me. They distributed flyers throughout the neighborhood depicting me as a greedy outsider who had stolen community property. They posted signs at the base of the mountain warning residents about unauthorized and dangerous ski conditions. They even organized a community meeting where Patricia gave an impassioned speech about preserving neighborhood amenities. I tried to keep to myself, continuing my daily routines and avoiding confrontation. But it became increasingly difficult as members of the HOA began parking along the county road that ran past my property, taking pictures whenever I was outside and occasionally shouting comments about property thieves and community destroyers. The situation came to a head one evening in early February. I was returning from dinner in town when I noticed several cars parked near my access road, their headlights illuminating a group of about 20 people standing at the base of my property. As I pulled closer, I realized they were HOA members holding protest signs. Save our mountain, community rights matter, and Keating go home. Patricia stood at the center of the group, megaphone in hand. When she spotted my truck, she raised the megaphone. There he is. The man who stole our mountain. I parked and stepped out of my vehicle. This is getting ridiculous, Patricia. You're trespassing again. We're on the county road right of way, she countered. Perfectly legal. Harassing a private citizen isn't legal, I replied. A middle-aged man stepped forward. You're the one harassing our community by taking away our recreational area. I didn't take anything, I explained, trying to remain calm. The HOA's lease expired and I purchased the property legally, without offering the community first right of refusal. Patricia shouted into her megaphone. The HOA had maintained those ski trails for 15 years. That was between you and Randall Development, I said. I was a third-party buyer. If you had an agreement with Randall for first right of refusal and they violated it, your complaint is with them, not me. A woman near the back called out, Our property values will plummet without access to the mountain. I understand your frustration, I said, addressing the crowd rather than Patricia. But this is my private property. I've never stopped anyone from hiking the public trails that cross the lower section of the mountain. I only object to the HOA claiming ownership and trying to dictate how the land is used. I could see some uncertainty in a few faces. Patricia must have noticed it too, because she quickly raised her megaphone again. Don't let him fool you. He plans to develop this mountain. Condos, timeshares, who knows? Our peaceful community will be destroyed. That's completely false, I protested. I have no development plans. Then why won't you grant the community an easement? Patricia demanded. Why won't you put that in writing? Before I could respond, headlights appeared on the road and a police cruiser pulled up. Officer Garcia stepped out, surveying the scene with a weary expression. "Miss Wilkerson," he said, approaching Patricia, "we've received noise complaints from residents. I need you to disband this gathering." "We're exercising our right to peaceful protest," she argued. "Not at 9 o'clock at night in a residential area," Officer Garcia replied firmly. "Please ask everyone to go home." Patricia reluctantly instructed her supporters to leave, but not before promising them that the HOA would continue fighting for community rights. As the crowd dispersed, Officer Garcia approached me. "You okay, Mr. Keating?" "Just tired of the harassment," I admitted. "This has been going on for weeks." He nodded sympathetically. "The department is aware of the situation. If they trespass again or the harassment continues, don't hesitate to call us." After he left, I stood in the cold night air, staring up at the moonlit slope of my mountain. What had started as a simple misunderstanding had escalated into all-out war. And for what? The right to ski on my own property. The next morning, I received a call from Rachel Frost, a local journalist with the Valley Creek Gazette. "Mr. Keating, I've been following the dispute between you and the Valley Creek Estates HOA. I'd like to get your side of the story." I hesitated, wary of fueling the conflict further, but realized this might be my best chance to correct the misinformation circulating in the community. "I'd be happy to speak with you," I said. "Would you like to come up to the property? Seeing it firsthand might help clarify the situation." Rachel agreed, and we arranged to meet that afternoon. She arrived promptly at 2, a petite woman with auburn hair tucked under a knit cap, a professional camera slung over her shoulder. "Beautiful place," she remarked as I welcomed her into my cabin. "How long have you owned it?" "Just over 3 years," I replied, offering her coffee. "I purchased the entire parcel, including the mountain, from Randall Development in late 2022. "And when did you become aware of the HOA's claim to the property?" I explained the timeline of events, showing her my documentation and describing the escalating tensions. Rachel listened attentively, occasionally taking notes. "The HOA claims you purchased the property knowing they had maintained it for years," she said. "Did you consider their interest when you bought it?" "I wasn't aware of their lease arrangement," I admitted. Randall Development disclosed that there had been a recreational lease that had expired. They assured me the property was being sold free and clear of any encumbrances. If the HOA had a right of first refusal in their lease agreement, that was between them and Randall. Rachel nodded. "Would you mind if I took some photos of the property and the mountain?" "Not at all." We spent the next hour touring the property. I showed her the natural ski runs I used, the boundaries of my land, and the public hiking trails that cross the lower portion of the mountain. "So you don't prevent public access to those trails?" she asked. "Never have," I confirmed. "Those are county-maintained trails with established easements. I've only objected to the HOA claiming authority over my private property." As we were returning to the cabin, a Valley Creek Estates security vehicle pulled up at the base of my access road. A uniformed guard got out and began taking photos. "Does that happen often?" Rachel asked. "Almost daily," I sighed. "They're documenting every time I use my own property, supposedly for their lawsuit." Rachel frowned. "That seems excessive." "It's harassment," I stated flatly, "but I'm not going to let them intimidate me into giving up my property rights." After Rachel left, promising a fair article, I called Marcus to update him on the interview. He had news of his own. "I've been doing some digging into the HOA's claims," he said. "Turns out there was never a right of first refusal in their lease agreement with Randall." In fact, the lease specifically stated that upon expiration, the HOA would have no further claims to the property. Can we use that to get their lawsuit dismissed? I asked hopefully. I've already filed a motion, Marcus confirmed, but there's something else you should know. I found records of HOA board meetings from 2 years ago, right before your purchase. They discussed the expiring lease and decided not to renew because they thought the asking price was too high. I sat up straighter. So they knew the lease was expiring and chose not to renew. That completely contradicts what they've been claiming. Exactly. Patricia Wilkerson was board president then too. She signed the minutes acknowledging the decision. So this whole thing has been a fabrication, I said, anger rising in my voice. They're trying to bully me into giving them what they refuse to pay for. It looks that way, Marcus agreed. I've requested an emergency hearing with the judge to present this evidence. With luck, we might get this resolved quickly. Rachel's article appeared in the Valley Creek Gazette 2 days later. The headline read, "Mountain Dispute, Property Rights vs. Community Access." To my relief, the piece was balanced, presenting both sides of the conflict, but including the newly discovered information about the HOA's decision not to renew their lease. The community reaction was swift. My phone started ringing with calls from Valley Creek Estates residents who claimed they had no idea the HOA had declined to renew the lease. Several expressed outrage that their HOA dues had been used to fund a lawsuit based on misleading information. Patricia's response came in the form of an emergency HOA newsletter delivered to all Valley Creek homes, claiming the article contained dangerous misinformation and reaffirming the board's commitment to reclaiming community property. She also announced a special assessment of $500 per household to fund the ongoing legal battle. That proved to be a strategic mistake. The next evening, the Valley Creek Estates Clubhouse was packed with angry homeowners demanding explanations. I learned about the meeting through a neighbor, Martin Chen, who had reached out to apologize for the HOA's behavior. "You should come," Martin urged over the phone. "People need to hear directly from you, not Patricia's spin." I was hesitant. Won't that just create more conflict? "The conflict already exists," Martin pointed out. "This might be your chance to resolve it." Against my better judgment, I decided to attend. When I walked into the crowded clubhouse, the room fell silent. Patricia, standing at the podium, looked as if she'd seen a ghost. "What is he doing here?" she demanded. "This is a private community meeting." Martin stood up from his seat in the front row. "I invited him. As a property owner adjacent to our community and the subject of our discussion, I think he has a right to be heard." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Patricia's face tightened, but she nodded curtly. "Very well. Mr. Keating can observe, but this meeting is for discussing HOA business." An elderly man in the back called out, "I think understanding why we're being assessed $500 for a lawsuit that seems to contradict our own board minutes qualifies as HOA business." Applause followed his statement. Patricia attempted to regain control, launching into a prepared statement about the historical importance of the mountain to the community and the board's duty to protect property values. "But is it true the board declined to renew the lease 2 years ago?" asked a woman near the front. "The article said you signed those minutes, Patricia." Patricia shifted uncomfortably. "The board explored multiple options. The lease renewal terms offered by Randall were extortionate." "So you did decline to renew?" the woman pressed. "We were negotiating," Patricia snapped. "Randall sold the property without giving us the opportunity to make a counter-offer." "That's not accurate," I said quietly, but my voice carried in the now silent room. "According to the county records, Randall sent the HOA 3 notices about the expiring lease over a 6-month period. The final notice, sent 30 days before expiration, explicitly stated their intention to sell the property on the open market if the HOA declined to renew at the asking price. "And how would you know that?" Patricia challenged. "Because my attorney obtained copies of those notices, along with the certified mail receipts showing they were delivered to and signed for by the HOA office," I replied calmly. "In fact, you personally signed for 2 of them, Patricia." The room erupted in angry shouts and questions. Martin managed to restore order after several minutes, suggesting that I be allowed to address the gathering. Patricia, clearly outnumbered, reluctantly stepped aside. I kept my remarks brief and factual, explaining how I had purchased the property, my understanding of its history, and my willingness to work with the community on reasonable access arrangements, though I was firm that the mountain itself remained my private property. "I've never prevented anyone from using the public trails that cross my land," I concluded. "My dispute has been with the HOA's claim of ownership and authority, not with individual residents who want to enjoy the mountain responsibly." The meeting ended with the homeowners voting to suspend the special assessment and form a committee to investigate the board's actions regarding the mountain lease. Patricia stormed out before the votes were even counted, her face a mask of fury. As I left the clubhouse, several residents approached to apologize or thank me for coming. Martin walked me to my truck. "That went better than I expected," he admitted. "But Patricia won't give up easily. She's invested too much of her ego in this fight. I just want it resolved," I sighed. "I bought this property for peace and quiet, not endless conflict," Martin chuckled. "Welcome to life next to an HOA. Peace and quiet are rarely on the agenda." The next morning brought unexpected developments. My motion hearing was scheduled for the following week, but before that could happen, 3 members of the Valley Creek Estates board arrived at my door. Patricia was conspicuously absent. "Mr. Keating," began an older gentleman who introduced himself as Edward Thompson, the board's treasurer. "We'd like to discuss a potential resolution to our dispute." I invited them in, curious about this sudden change in approach. Over coffee, Edward explained that after reviewing the documentation and the events of last night's meeting, the board had voted to seek a compromise. "We're prepared to acknowledge your ownership of the property," he said, "in exchange for a formal access agreement for community residents to use designated ski trails during winter months." "What about the lawsuit?" I asked. "We would withdraw it completely," replied Vanessa Mills, another board member. "This has gotten out of hand, and we recognize that the HOA's position has been problematic." I considered their offer. While I valued my privacy, I had no objection to letting neighbors use the natural ski runs, provided they respected boundary limitations and understood the risks involved. "I'm open to discussing an access agreement," I said cautiously. "But I'd need limitations on hours, clear liability waivers, and an understanding that this remains private property that I can close if conditions are unsafe." They seemed relieved by my willingness to negotiate. We spent the next hour outlining a potential agreement. Residents would have access to 3 designated ski trails from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. during winter months, would sign liability waivers, and would access the trails from a designated entry point that wouldn't require crossing my residential area. The HOA would provide some maintenance funding and insurance coverage, but would have no authority over the property itself. "What about Patricia?" I asked as our discussion concluded. "She seems personally invested in claiming the mountain as HOA property." Edward and Vanessa exchanged uncomfortable glances. Patricia has been temporarily removed from her position as board president pending an internal investigation, Edward finally said. Last night's meeting revealed some concerning issues, such as it appears Patricia may have withheld information from the board regarding the lease expiration and Randall's notices, Vanessa explained. Some board members had no knowledge of the decision not to renew the lease. I was stunned. She acted unilaterally. We're still investigating, Edward said diplomatically. But it seems she presented a very different picture to the board than what actually occurred. After they left, I called Marcus to discuss the proposed agreement. He advised proceeding cautiously, but thought the terms were reasonable. We arranged to meet with the HOA's attorney the following day to draft a formal agreement. That evening, as snow began to fall gently outside, I stood on my deck watching the mountain disappear into the gathering darkness. For the first time in weeks, I felt hopeful that this conflict might actually be resolved. My optimism was premature. Around midnight, I was awakened by the sound of an engine. Looking out my bedroom window, I spotted headlights moving up my access road, a large vehicle of some kind, moving slowly through the fresh snow. Grabbing my phone and a flashlight, I pulled on boots and a coat and stepped outside. The vehicle was a snowcat groomer, its massive treads crushing the pristine snow as it climbed toward the main ski run. In the driver's seat, illuminated by the vehicle's interior lights, sat Patricia Wilkerson. I immediately called 911, reporting the trespasser and potential vandalism. Then I followed the snowcat's path, staying at a safe distance. Patricia had reached the main slope and was now using the groomer to deliberately tear up the snow, driving in erratic patterns that destroyed the smooth surface and created dangerous ruts and ridges. When she spotted my flashlight, she turned the snowcat directly toward me. For a terrifying moment, I thought she might actually try to run me down, but she stopped about 20 feet away, the engine idling loudly in the silent night. "This is what you get," she shouted through the open window of the cab. "If I can't have my mountain, neither can you. Patricia, you need to leave immediately," I called back. "I've called the police. They're on their way." She laughed, a high, unnatural sound that echoed across the snow. "By the time they get here, I'll have destroyed every ski run on this mountain. You'll never enjoy it again." She revved the engine and turned the snowcat toward another slope. I remained where I was, documenting her vandalism with my phone's camera until I heard sirens in the distance. When Officer Garcia and his partner arrived, Patricia was still operating the snowcat, having churned up a significant portion of the main ski area. The officers used their vehicle's loudspeaker to order her to stop and exit the vehicle. To my amazement, she refused, accelerating the snowcat up a steeper section of the mountain. The officers pursued on foot as far as they could in the deep snow, but the snowcat had the advantage on the terrain. "We need to get ahead of her," Officer Garcia said, breathing hard from the exertion. "Is there another access road on the far side?" "There's a maintenance road that loops around the back of the mountain," I confirmed. "It's accessible from the county road about a mile north." Garcia radioed for additional units to block that exit while we continued to monitor Patricia's erratic path across the mountainside. The snowcat's headlights bobbed and weaved through the darkness, occasionally disappearing behind stands of pine, only to emerge again on another section of the slope. It took nearly an hour, but the police eventually trapped the snowcat between patrol units at the rear maintenance road. When Patricia finally surrendered, she was handcuffed and placed in the back of a police cruiser, still shouting about community rights and property theft. As dawn broke over the mountain, the damage became fully visible. The snowcat had torn up nearly every skiable section of the mountain, leaving dangerous ruts and exposed rocks. The cost of repairs would be substantial, and the remainder of the ski season was effectively ruined. Patricia was charged with criminal trespass, vandalism, and malicious destruction of property. When the officers searched the snowcat, they found documents in her purse that added to her legal troubles: forged board minutes purporting to authorize her actions, and a series of emails to Randall Development that she had hidden from the HOA board, in which Randall had offered the HOA a significantly lower lease renewal rate than Patricia had reported. The evidence suggested that Patricia had deliberately misled the board about the lease negotiations, possibly because she had personal designs on the mountain property. Additional investigation revealed that before I purchased the land, Patricia had been in preliminary discussions with a developer about a joint venture to build luxury vacation homes on the mountain, a plan that would have personally benefited her, but would have completely changed the nature of the community's access. In the aftermath of Patricia's arrest, the HOA's internal investigation uncovered years of similar deceptions. She had used her position to manipulate property rules to benefit herself and her allies, while strictly enforcing violations against those she disliked. Several homeowners came forward with stories of excessive fines, selective enforcement, and intimidation. The remaining HOA board members were horrified by the revelations. They proceeded with our access agreement as planned, but with additional provisions. The HOA would fund the repair of the damage caused by Patricia's vandalism, and they would establish new transparency requirements for board decisions to prevent similar abuses in the future. As spring approached, bringing an end to what remained of the ski season, I found myself in the strange position of working alongside many of the same community members who had protested against me just weeks earlier. Volunteers from Valley Creek Estates joined me in repairing the damaged ski runs, removing debris, and preparing the slopes for proper restoration when the snow melted. Martin Chen, who had become something of a liaison between me and the community, suggested establishing a more formal cooperative arrangement for maintaining the mountain recreation areas. "The truth is, most of us just want to enjoy the mountain," he explained as we worked side by side one afternoon. "Nobody wanted this conflict except Patricia." "Why did everyone follow her lead for so long?" I asked. Martin shrugged. "She controlled the information. Most homeowners don't attend every meeting or read every document. We trusted the board to act in our best interests. It was a mistake." Patricia's criminal case proceeded through the justice system. She eventually accepted a plea deal, receiving probation, community service, and an order to pay restitution for the damage she had caused. The HOA also filed a civil suit against her to recover misappropriated funds discovered during their investigation. As summer arrived, I found myself hosting a community barbecue on my property, something I never would have imagined months earlier. Residents from Valley Creek Estates hiked up to my cabin, bringing side dishes and drinks to share. Children played on the lower slopes, and adults discussed plans for improved ski runs for the coming winter. Edward Thompson, now serving as the interim HOA president, raised a toast. "To good neighbors and new beginnings," he said. "And to Noah, for showing more patience and forgiveness than many of us would have in his position." Later, as the sun set behind the mountain, casting long shadows across the valley, Rachel Frost approached me with a glass of wine in hand. "Quite a different scene from when I first interviewed you," she observed. "How does it feel to go from community enemy to community partner?" I smiled, surveying the gathering of people who had become, improbably, my neighbors in more than just proximity. "It feels right," I said simply. This mountain has always been big enough to share. The problem was never about access, it was about control. Rachel nodded thoughtfully. Do you think communities like this can avoid another Patricia situation? I hope so, I replied. If there's a lesson here, it's that communities need to stay engaged and vigilant. HOAs serve a purpose, but they need oversight and transparency like any other governance structure. Spoken like someone who might be considering joining an HOA board, Rachel teased. I laughed. Not a chance. I bought this mountain to escape meetings and committees, but I'm happy to be a good neighbor. As the gathering wound down and people began making their way back down the mountain, Martin lingered, helping me clean up. You know, I've lived in Valley Creek for 8 years, he said, and I've never felt as connected to my neighbors as I do now. Sometimes it takes a crisis to build a real community, or rebuild one, I suggested. That winter, when the first heavy snow blanketed Black Hawk Mountain, I stood at the top of the main run, surveying the pristine white landscape below. The repairs had been completed, new safety signage installed, and a simple check-in system established at the designated community access point. As agreed in our formal arrangement, Valley Creek residents could ski the mountain from 9 to 4, signing waivers and checking conditions before heading up. In return, the HOA contributed to maintenance costs and provided liability coverage. The mountain remained my property, but it had become a shared treasure rather than a source of conflict. I pushed off, carving fresh tracks down the slope, enjoying the rush of cold air and the perfect silence that only exists in the moments after a snowfall. Halfway down, I spotted Martin and his family beginning their ascent on the hiking trail, skis slung over their shoulders. I waved, and they waved back, just neighbors enjoying a mountain morning, the battles of the previous year fading like old tracks under fresh snow. Later that day, as residents came and went on the mountain, I sat on my deck with a mug of hot chocolate, watching children learning to ski on the gentler slopes and experienced skiers tackling the more challenging runs. This, I realized, was what I had wanted all along, not isolation, but the right kind of connection. Not a mountain to myself, but a mountain I could share on my own terms. The dispute that had seemed so bitter and intractable had ultimately led to something better than either side had initially envisioned, a true community partnership based on mutual respect, rather than control and antagonism. As the sun began to set, casting the snow in shades of pink and gold, I thought about the strange journey that had brought me here. I had bought a mountain seeking solitude but had found connection instead. I had defended my property rights fiercely, but had discovered the joy of sharing what was mine. And I had faced down the worst kind of HOA tyranny only to help build something better in its place. The mountain was still mine. But now, in the best possible way, it belonged to all of us.